Welcome everyone to today's webinar on 20 months post-Brexit. My name's Darshni Shah. I'm the product manager here with K3 SYSPRO, and I'm very pleased to be joined by Jared Silman, the senior finance consultant.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thanks very much for joining us. The webinar is going to run for about 20 minutes or so. It's not going to be a very long webinar, and we will definitely have room for questions at the end. Brexit. Well, it's definitely made the headlines over the last period of time, all the way from hauliers and long lineups at the customs clearance. Christmas was going to be cancelled, not enough turkeys or alcohol. What are we going to do with the cost of living? Not enough resources coming through. Everyone's gone back to Europe. When we're on vacation, we're going to have to pay for roaming. And can we even get on vacation if we're driving down into France? Lots and lots and lots of headlines. But what are we going to talk about today? Really not about the headlines. We're going to talk about the 20 months. Believe it or not, it has only been since 20 months since Brexit kicked off. Now, it feels like a lot longer. If you're like me, it feels like we've been talking about it for ages. And really we have. 2018 was when the draft withdrawal agreement came in. 2019, we were voting whether we wanted to leave the EU, deal or no deal. January 2020, we officially left the EU. From December 2020, we were in a transition period that ended, and trade with the EU is under a new deal with backstop arrangements. Come January 2022, full custom rules began to apply. So what does that mean? Well, today we're going to talk about some of the things that we covered in a previous webinar pre-Brexit kickoff. And really the reason for this webinar is a refresher. We found that we've got a couple of companies that still have questions, are still unclear on what to do, because we're really not here to solve all Brexit problems. But what we are here to do is talk a little bit about how SYSPRO can be set up to address some of the customs requirements associated with that, as well as all of the tax reporting requirements. So some of the key things to think about as part of the UK-EU Free Trade Agreement is the movement of goods. Fundamentally, the way we change goods moving from one place to another requires different custom clearance, different tariffs and quotas get applied, which means we get charged potentially different rates. There's tax implications. If you have presence in Northern Ireland, you may want to treat things differently. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I know a number of companies have also set up trading within the EU. You may have a presence physically within the EU now, where you may not have pre-Brexit. So what are some of the implications with SYSPRO specifically related to that? If you've already done all your setup, I'm not sure that we're going to add a ton of new information to you, but it would hopefully be a nice refresher. So what are some of the things we need to think about with the movement of goods? Well, some basic questions you want to think about as you're mapping your supply chain out. Where are you located? Are you within Great Britain itself? Do you have presence in Northern Ireland? Do you have presence in the Republic of Ireland, which for me also falls within the EU? And or do you have presence in the rest of the world? The next thing you need to think about is where are your customers located? That will impact the tariffs and quotas associated with what you're selling. Where are your suppliers located, which will impact your import duties? And where your suppliers and customers are located may not actually be where the goods are coming from, because they may have distributed warehouses as supply chains are getting more and more complicated. So keep that in the back of your head as we go through some of the setup requirements, as all of that impacts customs. When we're exporting, think about who's responsible for customs and VAT. Is it you or is it the end customer? And the way that you determine that is based on the relationship that you have agreed with them and the Incoterms you've agreed. That will determine the customs documentation and the VAT responsibility and the duty responsibility. When you're dealing with customs clearance, are you dealing with couriers who are taking care of the customs clearance for you? Do you have a freight forwarder? Do you have a trader or an agent that takes care of you, or is your haulier taking care of that for you? Or are you doing that in-house? So I'm curious, actually, at this point, just to see who's taking care of your customs clearance right now. And I've got a quick poll that I want to launch. If you wouldn't mind just answering the question, how do you manage your customs declaration today? Do you do this in-house? Do you have a freight forwarder or someone else looking after that for you? Or you're not sure? So if you could, please just go ahead and answer that question while it stays up on screen for a couple minutes. Excellent. So it looks like we have about 75 people, 75% that have outsourced it, and a quarter of you take care of that in-house. Thanks very much. Okay, what does that mean? Well, there is some additional information that we've had to take care of capturing and presenting back when it comes to exporting. The first thing we're going to talk about is an EORI number. This is something that you would have had to apply for. You could have an EORI number for yourself here in GB. You could have an EORI number in Northern Ireland. You could have an EORI number in Europe, and all three of those would be slightly different. Your customer also has an EORI number, and that's basically a way of identifying what records you have in order to be able to have the customs duty go through. What's the shipping location? Are you shipping to the customer's primary address? Do you have multiple shipping addresses stored for your particular customer? What are the Incoterms you've agreed with them? Who's responsible for paying that duty? You're having to store that and present that on the customs documentation. What are the commodity codes of the items that are actually being sold? And what's the country of origin? All of these combine to have that impact on customs. And you need to present that through into commercial invoices. And there's a number of different ways we can do that within SYSPRO. Now, if I swap sides and think about not just exporting out to my customers, but also about importing, we're going to see some similar threads here again. We still need that EORI number. The supplier in this case is providing us with the EORI number. We're going to need to know what the shipping location is. We're going to need to know the Incoterms, commodity codes, country of origin. Now, in this case, the documentation you update that on is slightly different, depending on what you're presenting. Predominantly, it's the supplier that's going to be driving this, of course. So much for talking. Jairus, let's take a look and see how we set all of this up.
Excellent. So let's start with, EORI numbers. There isn't a standard field in SYSPRO. Those of you who don't know, and believe me, there have been a couple who haven't known this, that you can add your own custom form fields in. In this instance, I've added one in. It could be multiple numbers in there. What's the maximum length of it to stop people putting silly data in? And then you would drag it in, and then we could, obviously, once it's in a custom form field, we can report on that. So same for suppliers. I have one set up for them as well. In fact, we don't need to print anything on a purchase order from a supplier point of view, but you could obviously set that up. Company level as well, we can set up a custom form field for our EORI number, or we could just hard code it on the stationary formats. So again, we have two custom form fields that we've added at a company level setup. So if you had two different companies within the UK, each of them could have should have a different EORI number if they're a different company. They might be in the same VAT group, but they, so I've done that. So we could, I would imagine those of you who are doing this have probably gone into each customer and manually updated the customer records. We do have Quantum, which will allow us to import master data. And the great thing with that is it gives us some validation as well. So if I do an add, custom form data, and then here I have my custom form data. So that would be for customers, the customer number, the field that I've created, and then the data that I want to import. And we paste it in here. It'll do a quick validation. Okay, if there were any errors, obviously if I had an invalid customer or if this field name was the incorrect name, it would tell us at that particular point, and we can just import them. So customer master data, so these quantum fields are only available from 7 onwards, I think. Darshini, did we have traces of it in 6? I think it really came out in 7.
Yeah, the bulk of it came out in 7. So custom form fields, I think, is a relatively new function.
Okay, so if you are the import master data as well, I think is new. Custom form fields for customers, I think, might have come out a little bit before then. I think you could do them in previous versions. So obviously everything is version specific. So if you are on an older version of SYSPRO, you might not have access to some of these things that we're going to go through today. So let's have a look at a customer setup then. So we've got the EORI number in here. We also have delivery terms. So we're talking about our Incoterms now. You can set a default on the customer if you know you're always going to use a certain terms code, or you could leave it blank, and then as and when the orders went on, you would pick it. I do believe most of the time people are just setting it as a default because they hardly ever change. I suppose just might change if you have to get something in a hurry, or you might be getting it from another one of their sites. There might be some other rules and regulations. Stock codes, we were talking about tariff codes. So again, if they are important, I think that highlighting them in a different color is something that makes it stand out. So the person adding a new product code will know, make sure that those 2 fields are populated when we've put that stock code in, because those are the most important. Obviously product class and part category are important, but I'm just highlighted these 2 just for this example.
This is a good one, Jairus, because I know we've had a few people ask about where I can put commodity codes in, just because the terminology is different. These are standard fields. We've not had to add custom.
Correct.
So
yeah.
just to remember that tariff code, HS commodity code is really the same thing. It would present on Intrastat reports as needed as well.
Correct. Then we have on the right, we have country of origin, which again, I believe, has been sort of discussed quite a bit from some of our customers, where they might buy a product from multiple countries. Unfortunately, from a SYSPRO point of view, we only set it on the stock master. So there will be one country of origin. I believe if you wanting to record it, the only way we could safely record it is if you set those items as traceable or so lot or serialized, so that when they actually pick the lot and serial, that we can then go and get the country of origin from that particular lot and print it on the document.
That's a good point, because if you're having to keep track of it at a granular level, it's a particular item that's from a different country of origin rather than the overall stock item, which you could pick anywhere in the warehouse. You need that level of traceability if you're needing to report down to that level.
Yeah. I do think that there's, I think I heard something that if you buy a watch, that is Swiss made. It only has to be assembled, and so many percentage of the components bought in Switzerland. The rest can be bought from other places in the world, so long as it has a certain percentage in. It's called Swiss made, so country of origin is Switzerland. Even though the box that it comes in comes from China and the strap comes from Italy, and it's lovely. I do like these rules and regulations. I don't know them, but I just heard that.
And I think it does change based on what it is. A watch might have a slightly different rule than a piece of machinery.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think. We have looked at other ways of maybe trying to record it, but a lot of that data, if we don't know which item we picked, we won't actually know where that specific item came from unless it was traceable in some way, or batchable or traceable, or whatever we're going to call it. It also means that the people in the warehouse would need to pick the correct item or tell us the batch number so that we could actually print it out on the document. I think those are the areas that we needed to cover. So we've got delivery terms, adding our EORI number, commodity code / tariff code. I think that's it.
That's it. I think the only other thing we would probably want to look at is the multiple ship to addresses, the fact that you can have different ship addresses, and then what that might look like in documentation.
Okay. So if I go to one of my customers, which has no ship address, there must be. So I'll put I have too many customers in here now.
The joy of demo data, that's all dummy.
Yeah, I know I've put an order on for them, so we'll go into sales orders because it's the easiest thing to do. So this customer, I believe, customer query. If it's not, I'm going to add them in. So obviously you have your nationality, your geographic area set up on your individual customers, and then your multi-ship address. You can have additional nationalities, delivery terms set as a default on there, and obviously relevant VAT number depending on what the rules are when you delivering the goods and what you have to print on their invoice. Simple to add. They can add at order entry. There are some mandatory fields, and they are these nationality delivery terms. Delivery terms can be left blank, I believe. But nationality, geographic area, so it knows about the tax that it's got to charge. I think we're looking at tax a little further on, but our tax is set by geographic area, and then within the area we would specify what tax code we need to set up on or charge those customers. So in this case it's 0%, which is my tax code C. And of course all of those addresses can be imported in Quantum as well if needed. I think everyone on the call has probably been using SYSPRO for a little while, so most of the data will be populated already.
Excellent. Good refresher just to make sure that or functionality that exists out of the box. I think, Jairus, we're going to look at the commercial invoice that we can generate at this point, if that's okay as well.
Sure. So rules as well with this commercial invoices. When do you actually want to raise it? Is it raised as part of when the dispatch is raised? So should the dispatch be another format within the dispatch which will provide you with the same information? But in this case, I've raised it as an actual invoice format. And what we have on here, I've told it to print the word commercial invoice. So if it was a dispatch document, you could also say that if I'm using a different format, this is what we print. We have the VAT number, the company VAT number. We have the EORI numbers at the bottom. Bank details depending on currency, the EORI number of where we're sending it to. Oh, that's ours. So the customer one is not there because I didn't import. When I created this, I hadn't imported their tax number, but I have another one which we should be able to reprint with no problem. Incoterms as well. Number of boxes. So these are just custom form fields that we set up on the dispatch note. So when the goods are packed, we record exactly how many boxes and pallets they are going to send out, and then that can be printed either on the invoice or on the dispatch document if we're going to use the dispatch as the point of creating the commercial invoice. I think, Darshini, there is also, I think, something that they're going to be looking at the customer event for web printing.
Yeah, we've actually got a webinar coming up next month before the customer event, just talking a little bit about K3 web reports. That's a good point, because we found as we've gone through this with different customers that there are some where SYSPRO's out-of-the-box invoices aren't quite addressing, or the order acknowledgement isn't giving you what you need. So we've got the ability to expand out and use a tool called K3 web reports that then allows you to extend out and create that commercial invoice. Good.
Okay. So yeah, with these, for example, a customer custom form field, which I haven't linked, that's why it's not printing. I would link it to the EORI number so that it would go to the customer record in this case and get the EORI number. But if I had stored something on a multiple ship address, then I would have had to have another custom field that we'd need to pull in.
Perfect. Sounds good. So hopefully this is something that you've already taken care of. This is something that we're just refreshing and saying, yep, what you should be doing is in fact possible. If you haven't got commercial invoices, you're looking to expand that out, then hopefully this is of use. Excellent. Good. And we'll flip back.
I think it's also a help for those who might have to provide the people who are doing the documentation for them, provide all the information. If it's all in SYSPRO, then when they send the data out, it's pulling through that custom form field and sending it along with the data
100%.
so that they can do the documentation for them.
Yeah, especially the ones that are outsourcing it. You're the master of the data. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Not sitting in a spreadsheet somewhere that someone might forget to type in, or
There's no spreadsheets that exist in
no, don't say that. We know spreadsheets are considered good.
Of course. So what are some of the other things to think about? Well, we've looked in SYSPRO. Do you have any additional customer reports, data switch contracts, external integration points? Some may actually be integrated directly to the hauliers to be able to exchange that information. So make sure that you've mapped all of that correctly. And if you've got any ODBC links, old school style, to external documents, maybe even spreadsheets. So let's go ahead and pick that up. The other thing that is also coming through that will require you, if you haven't already, to update your technical documentation is the migration of labeling laws, moving away from European CE mark to UKCA labeling. Now, just a quick show of hands, if that's okay. Is anyone impacted by the change to UKCA? I'm curious to know if you just want to raise your hand. Okay, it looks like we've got UKCA all covered here. Excellent. Right, so we won't spend any more time talking about that then. What's changed? The key thing that changed as of January this year is Intrastat reporting. Until January, we would have to report in the UK. Intrastat reports out to anything that went out into the EU. EC sales lists were not needed and continue not to be needed. The only exception to that is if you exist in Northern Ireland. So nothing's changed there. From a Brexit perspective, continue doing what you're doing in this particular case. Some other things to think about, three areas I want to talk about. This is not necessarily Brexit related. There's a heck of a lot going on in the world right now. Delivery delays, supply chain challenges, we've been talking about that and hearing the news around this. Some tools that we have in SYSPRO to help with that is your stock location. Make sure that your warehouse details and where the information is located are accurate and up to date. And you have the ability also to keep track of lead time and dock-to-stock details that will help identify and help you plan a little bit better as well. The next thing you want to talk about is associated with all of the pricing. Are you pushing pricing and price increases down to your customer, or are you renegotiating that with them? And I know this is something that is taking a lot of time and energy and a lot of discussions around what's going to get absorbed versus what's going to get pushed out. Tools, if you do choose to go ahead and update pricing, include your inventory pricing updates. If you're getting charged foreign price updates, contract pricing, trade promotions. And the last thing I want to talk about is the costs. Well, before you increase prices, you also need to get a sense of what your costs are. And to identify what that cost is, we're talking about Ofgem tomorrow and announcing the next price cap. Is there an increase in price energy? If it is, how can you manage that and quickly update that? And SYSPRO, there's the price cost percentage change, the BOM cost implosion, and if you're importing and you've got landed cost tracking to be able to track that at a more granular level. So 3 things to think about. They're not necessarily, again, as I say, Brexit related. We are going to do a deeper dive into all 3 of these topics in breakout sessions at the customer event. So if this is something that's off topic to you, I'd encourage you to come out and actually bring your stories to share at that event as well, which is going to be in November. So on to the exciting subject of VAT. Services. If you are purchasing services from the EU, reverse charges will absolutely still apply. No changes at all to your reverse charges. Some considerations about things here. Okay, we've had quite a few discussions and questions around this. EC flag. Now that we're no longer part of the EU, from a SYSPRO perspective, should we just turn the EC flag off?
No. We will cover that in a minute. Yeah, definitely not. Sorry.
Definitely not. Definitely not. That's absolutely the right answer. So we'll talk a little bit about why that's not the case. If you haven't already, also look at updating your tax rates. There are implications on VAT reporting depending on the tax rates that you have. And Joris touched on this when she went into SYSPRO itself. It's around geographic areas, what to do with that. All right. Before I jump into postponed VAT, I think, Joris, do you want to talk a little bit about why we need to keep that EC flag on?
Oh, a number of reasons. So one of the key reasons, even if you only sell to the UK, that you need to leave it on is there's an option in the accounts payable module that allows you to set a default tax code by supplier. If you turn that off, it doesn't enable you to save a default tax code by supplier. And if you, without knowing, post an invoice with no tax code on because you didn't notice it, it won't get written to your tax return because there's no tax implication on that. So definitely leave the flag on. There are some other things you can do with nationalities and that, which we'll have a look at in a minute, but
Yeah.
that is the main reason. Now, we have passed this back to SYSPRO to say it would be very nice if we still had that functionality in the AP without the EC flag on. Again, it's something they said they're going to do. It will only happen in 8 or one of the versions of 8. So please, if you have turned it off, I would suggest you turn it back on and make sure that all your new suppliers have the correct information set on them, because the old suppliers, it should still sit on the table for when you turn it back on again.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jairus, as you alluded to it, there are some implications associated with nationality and interest that we'll get into a little bit later.
Yep.
All right, postponed VAT. The UK government brought in the ability for UK businesses to manage cash flow a little bit better. For anyone that's importing, you can defer the VAT associated with that. So if you're importing goods that are not controlled into from the EU, fundamentally what you're going to do is, we talked about the fact that your tax code changes. So from anything that you've brought in from the EU, it's going to be zero rated from a tax perspective. So you capture a £100 invoice from the EU supplier, you post it into SYSPRO AP, and when you do that with a zero rate, all it will do is impact box 7. Now, for those of you that are paying close attention, no, it's going to impact box 9 as well. That's what it does.
It does, yeah, it does as a standard with that EC flag on. Yeah.
100% well. So that's what we've done, is we've actually gone ahead and hit box 7 and 9, but the SYSPRO Making Tax Digital solution that we have from K3 will take care of that box 9. So that's why I've left that as a 0 there, just something we're going to touch on shortly. Now, you're going to capture that invoice, and you're going to progressively be capturing all of the invoices as they come in from your EU suppliers. What then happens is, before you file your VAT, you have the ability to report your postponed import VAT. You're downloading this through a VAT statement online. You used to pull it down from Chief. You'll now pull it down from the Customs Declaration Service. Government's changed the way that you access that. And for Making Tax Digital, all you're going to do is enter in, for that particular period, the values that you need in box 1 and box 4. And fundamentally, that's going to take care of your VAT reporting for postponed VAT for that particular VAT filing period. So as part of your process, you want to make sure that you're taking care of that before you choose to file your VAT. That's postponed VAT in a nutshell. What you'll notice...
Sorry, that box 1 and 4 is only part of the Making Tax Digital solution, because it doesn't add the entries in just via normal journal, or it has to be, there's a process that you run within Making Tax Digital which will add the entries in.
That's a good point, Ashley. And Joyce, I think you're going to showcase that a little bit as well, aren't you? A little bit when we get into the demo. Perfect. The other thing I'll point out is, in the GoToWebinar panel, if you haven't already gone through the steps of what that looks like, we've created a document that outlines the way of capturing those journals in the handout section. So if you want to go ahead and pull the handout down, there's another handout that talks about all of the setup options we've discussed here for Brexit as well. So the 2 handouts are available in that GoToWebinar panel for you. Okay, moving on to the exciting subject of VAT. We talked about box 8 and 9 reporting. With the transition away from the EU, we no longer need to report our EC sales and EC purchases, which has a direct impact on the VAT return. Box 8 and 9 for UK-only companies must be 0. And the way that we do that is through an update on the Making Tax Digital program. The caveat to that is, if you are in Northern Ireland selling into the EU, you will still need to capture and make sure you're reporting box 8 and 9 for any sales or purchases. That's the only caveat. So we've taken care of all of those updates. Make sure you're on the latest version of the K3 Making Tax Digital program. If you haven't had your update, please reach out to the support desk. There is a project underway currently to update all of the customers to version 2.2 or higher of the MTD program. That takes care of that, but definitely drop them a note, and if that's needed, they will take care of that for you based on when you're scheduled in for it. All right, talked a lot about VAT, very exciting subject. I know it's near and dear to Jairus's heart. Let's see some of these things.
So let's just look at top level setup first. Oh, you know what it's called? It's easy just to go, I know exactly where it is. So EC system required, this box over here. We definitely want to leave it on for that very reason that I said. When you then come into payables, it enables you to say default tax code required, as well as foreign currency. Well, no, I think foreign currency you can do without that. So if someone in the UK invoices you in euro, you can still have that tick on, but definitely please leave that on until we come back and say, when you move to port X or version whatever of the program, you can now go and turn it off. We're hoping that they could do that in the not too distant future. So whilst we're here, Intrastat, we do have some defaults we can set. Again, if you're not using it because you're in the UK, then it does pay to set some defaults for some of the, definitely for the arrivals bits. So when the guys are receiving goods in the purchasing side, we don't want them to have to pick XWorks or DDP or whatever each time they're receiving it in, especially if you don't have to return report on your Intrastat of arrivals. So look at setting that if it's not set already. I don't think it's anything you would need to report on, but obviously if you did, you can also set these at supplier and customer levels as well. Okay, let's have a look at our nationalities first. So in our list of nationalities, we have this flag here that says, are they in the EC, yes or no? If you were a UK only company and you didn't need to run any sort of Intrastat report and there was no other SYSPRO company on your environment that was in the EU, then you could change this and say they're not a member of the EU. And then it'll stop all the pop-ups. But we're finding more and more people, because they've now had to have a presence in Germany or France or the Netherlands, that they have now a new SYSPRO company. And of course, nationalities is not a company by company table, it's a system table. So if you turn this off here, then in the company in the Netherlands, it will assume it's not a sale to the EU and it doesn't need to report it for you. So my thoughts are leave them set to yes, especially if you do deal with Europe, because at some stage you may create a new SYSPRO company to sell to from the UK who can then sell within the EU. And if you don't have this list, by the way, we do have a quantum that can be updated, but I think most people just add as and when they want to. So geographic areas. There can be lots of different uses for geographic area, but our suggestion has always been by tax per geographic region. So we would say if it's UK taxable, then it would say go to the stock code and see what that item is taxable or not, and if so, what's the percentage tax that you would apply against it. And then if we had EU one, we would say use tax code C, and tax code C is set as 0%. Okay. Whilst we on that, we mentioned to the suppliers, the EU suppliers that you have, that they should be set as a tax code of 0%, so it doesn't do that box 2 posting that it used to do in the past. So make sure that all your suppliers have a 0% tax code the EU suppliers set against them. Did forget to mention that earlier. Tax codes. Reverse charges. In any version prior to 8, if you're using the Making Tax Digital facility, we will have said post using this, as have a special tax code that you use to post. We'll call it reverse charges. You'll run an off ERP process, which will then do the box 2, box 4, and box 6 postings for you. That's not necessary anymore for those who are on SYSPRO 8 because we now have that facility within 8 of setting up a reverse charge tax code and call it reverse charges only.
Doris, just to clarify, what we're talking about here is if I choose to purchase services from someone that's outside of the UK, is
Correct.
when this particular tax will apply. And they want to keep track, the government wants to keep track of how many service deliveries are happening from external. So regardless of whether I choose to purchase that service from someone in the EU or I choose to purchase services from someone anywhere else in the world, the behavior is going to be the same.
Correct.
Excellent.
So, and I think the rules of place of supply of service, I think it's called. So if they do some work outside of the country for one of your divisions, then that's not a service. It's if the service is delivered to the UK by someone outside of the UK.
Perfect. So we've got a nice reverse charge only tax code that we set up, and then I've thrown you off your rhythm. Apologies.
No, that's all right. So you would then say, what's the percentage that we want to charge? You can have separate ledger codes if you want, because if you're reconciling by ledger code to your tax return, you'll have an input tax entry and an output tax entry that will be posted so that when you look in your ledger, you will actually see those entries in there. Whereas the one that we do for pre-8, it doesn't actually post anything. It's just a notional value added, and you can see it on the tax report, so you know what you need to add if you were going to try and reconcile that. So what can we do with that? So in our suppliers, we can, if it's someone who's going to always be a reverse charge only, we can set the reverse charge tax code in here. You notice still have to put an EC tax code in or a tax code of some sort. But you can set it up so that then when you're posting an invoice for the supplier, so you'll see here, it's worked out that reverse charge for you. If this one was like a once-off and it wasn't going to be reverse charge, then you'd have to space that out and you'd have to put the right tax code in at the top. So that would be a 0% tax code as an example. So you've got the option of flipping between the two, but if you set the default, it's much easier. It's a bit of a pain, I suppose, if there's more than one. But with the new functionality that's come up by supplier payments in 8, you can actually have 2 accounts, one that's reverse charge and one that's normal goods, and you can pay them off on the same payment. So you can do like a group payment within 8. So I'm going to take that out and put back in, does chat at me a bit, the one that I want, or C. So what does this do? This will calculate the tax amount. So when I go GL distribution, and I've coded it and I post it. What we'll see on the journal is it does the entry, input and output text entry, input output. The £1,000 goes into the ledger, and then in the background, when we run our text report, that 1,000 will be in box 6 as well.
Nice and simple.
Yep. Postpone VAT, I think was the other thing I needed to talk about. So what we've suggested that we do is part of your MTD config is you will set a user-defined source, and we'll say whenever I use a certain user-defined source, this is what needs to happen in there. So you'd post a normal journal, and here we'd say I need to affect something in box 1, and then you would code to that ledger code the value that you wanted to be added in from your postponed VAT accounting. And then you do a box 4, the other side of the entry, by the way, would go to a clearing account, and then you would do a box 4 journal, and you would put the debit into the input VAT account, and the other side to clear out the clearing account that you would have done on the first journal. So once you've posted those 2 journals, you run the MTD off ERP process, and that will add those 2 lines into box 1 and box 4 for you.
Excellent. And the values for that, of course, you're going to download from the government website, be it
Correct.
chief, or
Correct.
of course, anyone that's outsourcing it, maybe your haulier that's sending that through to you as well. Excellent.
Yep.
Good stuff. Good. So we've got some exciting VAT that we've just covered in terms of the how-tos, and hopefully you've already been doing this. This is just a bit of a confirmation that that's what you should be doing. If you have presence in Northern Ireland, we talked a little bit about this already. The customs declarations will depend on whether the goods are going into the EU or going into GB, and or if the items are coming in from the EU and or GB. Now, obviously, Great Britain, Northern Ireland behaves the same. The data that you update will be slightly different, and your VAT reporting will definitely be different. So keep that in mind if you've got presence within Northern Ireland. The other thing that we've seen, we talked a little bit about this when we had the initial webinar, was a setup of a number of companies where the presence, the footprint of the organization has expanded. And the first example we've got is where you've got a company that has presence in the UK, in Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland as well, and are selling and buying in between. And the second example we've got is where we've got presence in the UK, and then perhaps presence in France or Germany or Italy, one of the other EU companies, and they tend to be predominantly sales offices with their own reporting requirements as well. So we just wanted to talk through some of the things that you need to think about from a consideration perspective. First of all, it's your trade setup itself. You need to think a little bit about the currency consideration, what the intrastat reporting needs to be, and what VAT rates get charged, either on sale or on purchase. And so what I want to do is at this point, Jairus, we're going to talk through the 2 examples, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a company that is manufacturing in Northern Ireland and selling into the UK and selling into the Republic of Ireland.
Correct.
That was the first example that we had. So what are some of the considerations that we've got?
So they are actually registered for VAT in the Republic of Ireland. We have quite a few customers who actually sort of deal with ROI and are registered for VAT in there, even though they are also registered for VAT in the UK. So and it's at the moment it's one business selling, but in this instance, when we sell to the UK from Northern Ireland, it is, it is exactly what it is and what it would have been before. But when we sell to the Republic of Ireland, because we're VAT registered, we then have different VAT codes set up. So we would need to make sure that our geographic areas are set with the right tax code. Because if they are registered, obviously when they sell to them, they need to record the Irish VAT and declare it at the end of the day. One or two of them, we have a VAT add-on or an MTD add-on, which will extract it and work it out back into euros, because we need to provide the report to the Republic in euros, so the sales in euros and the VAT in euros.
Yeah, that's the currency consideration that's there as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So we also have someone who's registered in Ireland and they sell to Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland sells to the UK, but that is all in one SYSPRO company. So we have some complications when it comes to intrastate reporting, because we don't have a GB for NI and a GB for ROI. So it comes up as a sale, as a default, as a sale within the ROI company to UK, which is not member of the EU. But before now it was. So the ROI were declaring EU sales to GB, although they weren't selling, it was being sold from Northern Ireland. So it can get so complicated, and we try and say to people, split the companies out. Even if you do data switch transactions between the two to reflect it, and it all comes out in the right currency, and there's no mix up with intrastat and EC reporting.
100%. And I think that's even truer for the second example, where you've got presence in the UK and presence in a country like France or Germany, which I know that quite a few companies have already been set up and transacting in that manner. The reporting requirements have become a little bit more complicated since Brexit, but it is just about making sure, if you can, to split those two companies out. Obviously, we've worked with a number of companies, so if you do need additional help from a consulting standpoint, we've had some experience in this arena, so it is case by case. We definitely want to be able to help you out and see what the best path forward is for that.
We have had one or two customers who refuse to split the companies out, and then it's just the battle of getting all the reports out in the right currency, splitting out those that are not relevant, only those that are, maybe when the branch, maybe we've used branch, that the branch is equal to France, or the area doesn't always count, because sometimes there's no VAT charge on some items, so it does get a little complicated. Definitely makes sense to do it separate companies and do the transactions between the two.
Perfect, especially since we've got automation tools, so you're not having to worry about double data entry. Agreed.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Okay, that's just a touch on the complications that we could have, and to summarize, the considerations are obviously how you want to run the business. Think about the currency considerations when you're setting up the system. Where are you needing to report intrastat depending on where you're based, and what rates are going to get impacted. All right. There are other links if you wanted to know more. We've talked about some of these already. There's Trader Support Service, which the government had set up specifically to help organizations through the transition period. That is still up and running. Make UK has put quite a bit of effort into helping organizations through the transition period, and the government themselves have put together quite a bit of comprehensive documentation on the transition period, but more importantly, details around the full customs control and the transition between chief and CDS that's happening, that's impacting most organizations that are exporting and importing as well. So take a look at the government websites. They're pretty good at hosting webinars as well. They're as dry as can be, and I'm sure the subject itself doesn't help. You've hung in with us throughout this particular session, which is much appreciated. Just to keep in mind, by no means are Jairus and I tax or customs experts. We just wanted to share with you what we've learned over the last 20 months or so through working with different organizations, and also just some of the things that we've had come through on our support desk as well in terms of items that we thought might need a little bit more clarification. So thanks for joining us. If you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A panel. But otherwise, thanks for sticking out with the 20 months post-Brexit. Let's see what the next 20 bring. I'm just keeping an eye on the Q&A panel to see if there's anything that's come through at this point, and it looks like we've covered everything. Either that or people are furiously typing away.
Again, if there are things that they think about afterwards, it's always a case of get hold of your account manager, and they should direct you in the right area, or log a support call if you've got a question.
And I think Kelly will also follow up, so feel free to drop an email with the webinar recording after this particular session, and she can triage some of the questions as well if needed.
Perfect.
Brilliant. All right, looks like we've covered everything today. Again, thanks for your patience. It's not necessarily the most exciting subject, but you hung in with us. Appreciate it. Thank you, Jairus, for joining us today as well.
Thanks, Daphne. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.